Okay, so it's 2020, and so far this year has definitely been crazy, and I don't even really want to get into that, but E3 is one of the things that went down, ended up being canceled, and in the context of Halo, that is actually important because this year was supposed to be the year that 343 and Microsoft really got a chance to show off Halo Infinite, and Microsoft decided to go with a digital event as a way to adjust to the new circumstances because of 2020. And here we are now, we're finally able to see what this game looks like and plays like. And for context, Halo 5 came out in 2015, so this would be a 5-year development cycle, which would make it the longest for any Halo game. Typically it would be a 3-year cycle, sometimes even less than that. Like initially when I saw like the gameplay and the trailer, I was disappointed, but after getting a chance to sleep on it and take some more time to digest, process, I realized that there are some things that I like and some things that I don't like. I didn't hate all of it, but I didn't like all of it either. So let's look at the good and the bad, right? So the good first. First, open world. Personally, I think even though historically there's been a linear structure to Halo campaign storytelling and levels, I feel like the game really lends itself to an open world. And if you really think about it, like if you go back to Halo Combat Evolved, second level Halo, or even levels like Silent Cartographer, these wide open, spread out levels that give a little bit of choice to the player about how to go about finishing the level and completing certain objectives and, you know, dealing with certain obstacles. So, I mean, when you think about it, the second level of Halo, the first game, is one of the best levels in the entire franchise because it's open-ended and it gives you an opportunity to just sort of play around in the sandbox. And that's really Halo at its best, is when you get a chance to mess around with all the different weapon types and play with the vehicles and jump out and deal with the different enemy types and things like that. I think an open world structure is something that in the modern era can really work well for a game like Halo. Like people shouldn't see that as 343 copying or anything like that. Like I think that is honestly a natural progression. I'm definitely excited for the open world, and I think that can work really well for a game like Halo. Like the Halo sandbox lends itself very well to the open world because you can do landscapes, different kinds of environments, you can do enemy ships, interiors, you could do forerunner structures, exteriors and interiors, you can do corridors and stuff like that. You know, there's some, they might have to get creative for some certain things, but I think I'm definitely excited for that. Also, if the single player is open world, I like what that means for the replayability, because that's going to lend itself to storytelling very well, but then also for just fun replayability. Now, the other good thing that I liked is that it looks like they're getting back to some of the classic gameplay loops that we see in the original trilogy and getting away further from some of the more trendy features that were added in Halo Reach for even a little bit of 5. So certain things like the removal of ADS, going back to different kinds of equipment. I'm sure we're gonna stick with things like equal starts. It looked like thrusters are not going to be as big of a deal as they were in Halo 5. There's obviously not going to be classes and all that kind of stuff that we see in Halo 4 and all that kind of stuff. Maybe there might be like something like loadouts or something like that, who knows, but it looks like we're getting back to some of the more classic design elements of the sandbox, where the player himself is not necessarily that complex in the game. Like Master Chief is pretty straightforward, but then it's really up to the player to interact with the sandbox in a very complex way. Like that's kind of what Halo was about in the earlier games, and eventually they tried to compound the complexity of the player by adding all these different abilities and classes and all this kind of stuff. But getting back to some of that more just simplified, streamlined gameplay that we're used to seeing, it's pretty apparent that they've taken note of that. They've taken note of where they strayed away from the original formula, and it's obvious that we're getting back to the classic feel, so that's good. One thing that I like as well is they said that they want this to be a platform for pretty much all of their experiences moving forward, and because they don't want to make a retail sequel to Infinite, you know, Halo Infinite 2 or anything like that. So because the game is open world, that's going to give them the opportunity to expand on it in a way that typically Halo has not been expanded on in the past. So when you look at things like DLC for Halo has meant more multiplayer maps, but not necessarily anything in terms of the story or campaign. And they touched on that in Spartan Ops and for Halo 4, and with Spartan Ops they realized that they didn't really apply the level of resources necessary to be able to expand on the story in that way. And then we saw Destiny come out a little bit later, and Destiny provided more of a formula for that kind of expanded open world storytelling that can evolve over time and continuously. And I know 343 doesn't necessarily want to make a live service game, and I'm not necessarily saying that, oh yeah, Halo should be live service, but there's a lot of interesting, positive possibilities now that open up in terms of the way that the single player can evolve over time if they take on this more open-ended structure in terms of the open world, in terms of added content and evolving the story. And they also said that they could evolve some of the technical features as well. Like they said, they're going to add ray tracing later on, so that means that they'll be able to actually continually mature the game. That's one of the new features of Halo Infinite, is that they built the ability for the game to breathe and evolve into the game, and that's definitely a positive, because the old way of making games might prove to be a little bit brittle in this new kind of environment now. And I think it should totally be expected that they want to evolve what they're doing. So I definitely support that. Also, I think I like where they're going with the art style. Yeah, like the art style for 343 has always been a big point of contention since Halo 4. Nobody has ever really felt that they've got it totally right. They've experimented a lot with the art direction, like how certain things should look, and how they've interpreted certain staples of the franchise, like how the armor should look and how the enemies should look and how the vehicles should look and things like that. And I understand that they've wanted to put their personal stamp on the game and make the fans understand that they are not Bungie, and I think it's important that the fans do understand that. But at the same time, I think it's also important to recognize that part of what makes Halo are its unique, eccentric characteristics. So ignoring some of those is gonna make your new game not feel like Halo, right? And I appreciate the fact that they're starting to appreciate that. Back in Halo 4, they didn't even have the signature music and things like that, so people wonder why this game just doesn't feel like Halo. Like, it needs the things that Halo has. It needs all these different little details. It's definitely in the details. And it looks like the art style is getting back to more of a traditional art style. But now I want to talk about the things that I think are bad about what I saw. And piggybacking on what I said about the art style is that the graphics really do not look good to me at all. And when I really look at it and I get a chance to watch the videos again and things like that in high definition, what I see are bland textures, weird lighting. Like, there's this weird thing that you see a lot in Halo 5, where the materials get this matte, diffused lighting that makes everything look plastic. Like, every material has this really plastic, matte look to it, and things that are supposed to be more glossy and metallic and have more precise lighting just never seem to be lit correctly, and the colors are just never properly saturated, so it just never looks right. And it's almost like sometimes it looks really cool, but then sometimes it doesn't look cool, and like most of the time it just doesn't really look that good at all, and it's this really ugly look that is really that I was looking forward to not having to deal with Halo Infinite. And it looks like a lot of the materials have that same kind of diffused matte look to it, and I can't stand it. Also, when you watch the trailer, there's all this texture pop in and the clouds like have a lot of pop-in where it just takes time for it to load. Like there's this really jarring delay on the loading of all of the lighting and details and things like that. And this is the kind of thing that like you could play games now that are better optimized than this. Like games that are from the 360 era. There's a really huge disparity in detail between the Master Chief and everything else. It seems like everything else is just really not necessarily as detailed as the Master Chief. Like he's lit nicely and he has all this detail on his armor and there's some wear and tear, and everything else seems like sort of a placeholder. And the other thing is, what they actually decided to show wasn't really that informative. We did get a chance to see the fact that it's now going to be open world and there's going to be more of a open-ended mission structure type of thing, but I wish they would have gone more into how exactly does that affect the narrative. When I really look at all the things that I didn't like about the presentation, it all kind of points back to the fact that it looks like they need more time. It looks like they were in a situation where they weren't ready to really show as much as they wanted to. I think that's why they haven't shown multiplayer yet, or more of the mission structure. But I think they realize that they basically have to at this point. Like there's no option this close to release. It's another year and I feel the exact same way, where I feel like we got the presentation that we should have gotten last year. Like I think the game can definitely be great, but it's going to need a lot of time for it to mature based on the state that it's in right now. And that would not be as much of an issue if we were 2 years out, 1 year out. The reason why I think it's worth worrying about is the fact that we're so close. And they're advertising holiday 2020. This is supposed to be a launch title for the Xbox Series X and the new generation. And I can tell that they want to sync that up. And there's obviously corporate interest involved that want to sync these things up. And it's, not giving the game the time that it needs to evolve has typically led to poor results in the past for many game developers and publishers and companies. So for me, I think one of the proactive things to do as a Halo fan is to embrace some of the hard lessons that we've learned during the Master Chief Collection, some of the hard lessons that we may have learned during Destiny, which is that year one might be a little bit rocky. Like this might be shaky. Obviously, it's pretty obvious that this game is going to need some time to mature itself. I definitely believe that there's a really interesting game somewhere in this, but in the state that we're being shown, it's definitely not there yet. And people are saying, "Oh, it's a demo. It's going to get better." Typically for this type of scenario, a game would not be getting better. A game would be getting downgraded by the time it gets to release. Typically, in the demo at what's supposed to have been E3, we'd be seeing the best possible version running on the highest thing with pre-rendered stuff and all kind of stuff like that. Like people seem to think that the game is going to improve itself between now and the release, when that's not typical for AAA games when it comes to E3 presentations. This is supposed to be an E3 presentation. So in my opinion, I'm not sure if I really subscribe to it's just a demo and we can kind of count on the fact that it's going to be better. But I hope that 343 is going to use the time that they have. I think it's obvious that this game is going to come in a little bit hot. It's going to need some time to mature. It's already going to be important, kind of maybe diffuse some of the hype and, strap in for the long haul. They obviously want to make an open-ended game that's going to receive lots of updates in the future. There's probably going to be lots of multiplayer updates and lots of single-player updates and missions and multiplayer type stuff. So they want to make an open game that they can expand on in terms of content and story and even engine technical capabilities, and that ability for them to expand is obviously one of the key features of the game moving forward. So it's going to need some room to breathe and grow. And I think that's the biggest thing that I'm taking away from the presentation, is that it's going to be some time before we get the best version of this game. But they're making a game that has that kind of potential. And I feel like I've been here before in this current generation. I feel like I've been in this situation, and I think it's important that we're realistic This is not the old days, and there's still a lot that remains to be seen. So they're going to be coming out with more information, I'm sure. Not that the embargoes have been lifted in lots of different places. So I'm going to be watching closely to see how things play out. But if anything, this presentation was a reality check that I was getting maybe a little bit too hyped, and I need to calm down a little bit. And maybe some Halo fans need to calm down as well with their expectations and strap in for a bumpy ride.